What's up, my DGens? I'm back finally. Sorry for the long wait, guys. I've been out and about, moving around. Mike, if you're listening, I have not forgotten about you. I just recently got back, and I'll be sending out your algorithm, spreadsheet, and all that kind of stuff here shortly. But let's get right into the video because I got a couple things I want to talk about. First, we're going to go over your pick, right? Because everybody wants to pick, even though it's the middle of June. Secondly, I'm going to give you guys kind of a look-ahead pick, or like we've talked about in the past, a pick that I'm not going to put money on just yet, and it could change, but it's kind of exactly what I just said, a look-ahead, right? Then we're going to go into my favorite topic, which is coaching, and I think I've kind of harped on this enough, but I still want to say it again. I want to go into why coaching matters and why it matters the most in the NFL, more than any other sport really that I can even think of. So let's get right into that. I'm going to get into the pick first, like I said, and this one's actually going to be for the Hall of Fame game. So the very first game right out the gate, and it is the Raiders at the Jaguars. It's August 4th. So you might not know this, but that's about 50 days away. So you don't really have that much longer to wait on this one. It's still a little ways out, so I get not wanting to put money on it right this second. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because typically the games will stay under for the Hall of Fame game. And if you've watched the Hall of Fame game before, you probably already know this, but a lot of times the starters don't even get playing time. They just go immediately into the second string, and even at that, if the second stringers are any good, like half-ass decent, if there's somebody that we know or have heard of before, they may not even get playing time. This Hall of Fame game is strictly for scrubs, for guys who are trying to just get some snaps in. Coach is going to reevaluate them and all that kind of stuff. But the reason that's important for us is because that means the playbooks are going to be pretty simple, and the defense is probably going to have the advantage. And like I said, I'm not breaking any news here. This is what it's like every year, and it's just how it goes. Nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to get their star players hurt. It's for a Hall of Fame game. Nobody's really going out there to try and put up 100 points. It's just kind of it is what it is. So, that being said, the line of 33.5 is actually kind of high for a Hall of Fame game. In years past, I've seen it like at 31, and sometimes it even closes like at 32, and that's kind of the norm. 33.5 is a little much, especially considering who's going to be playing in this game. When it comes to the Raiders, again, of course, none of the starters are going to play, right? But they don't really have any big name like backups that are coming in. They don't have Mariota. They're not going to have a second string quarterback that's going to move the ball effectively, at least not that we know of. Just looking at their roster. Same thing with the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence is probably not going to play in this game, and you really don't know how much time anybody's going to get in this game, other than like draft picks and things like that. And considering the talent level that was there last year, I do expect it to be much better. I actually think the Jaguars are going to be a pretty half-assed decent team this year, surprisingly enough. But that being said, I don't think that's going to come through at the Hall of Fame game. And just to kind of show what I'm looking at here, show my work when it comes to believing that this total is a little bit high and there's just a deficiency in the market there. If you go back and look at Hall of Fame game performances in the last, let's say since 2010, there has been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 actual games. Some of them were canceled, and you can see why. But of those 9 games, only 2 of those games went over 33 points. One of them ended at exactly 33. That was 2018, the Bears and the Ravens. Like I said, 2 went over. So you are looking at a 2-7 record at that 33.5 line. And again, considering the teams that are going out there, I'm not expecting a big, huge fireworks display, really, of any huge talent level being out there in the first place. So that's my pick. as far as immediate and something that I'm probably going to put money on before the end of the week, if not next week at the very latest, because as the game gets closer, that game or the line is going to change, and I really realistically think you probably only have a handful of weeks left, if that, before people kind of start jumping onto this. And I think by the time we get, let's say, 2-3 weeks away from this game, which is, it's about 6 weeks now, 7-8 weeks, something like that, basically a month from now, this line could be much different. You may be looking at like a 31 point line. So again, this is something I would probably jump on a little bit sooner than later, but still, don't rush to your keyboard if you're not already at it. That being said, what's the next pick? What's the look ahead, right? Well, I did find a deficiency in week 4. And week 4 for the Falcons is going to be really their home. I guess it's going to be their away, and then home game. So they open up against the Saints at home. Then they're going to go travel to LA. So keep in mind they're coming from Atlanta to LA, which again basically across the entire country, to play the Rams. Then from there they're going to go up to Seattle. Now they may stay on the West Coast, and I would assume that they probably will for that week, but either way they're going to go up to Seattle, and then travel back across the country to go back home to Atlanta to play the Browns, which in and of itself is already an issue. There's already a discrepancy there. Now, it may not be as big of a deal because, again, it's week 4. This isn't like week 16 or 17 or 18 for that matter, where the teams are already depleted and things like that. But, again, keep in mind, we're talking about a Falcons team that we don't have a whole lot of high expectations for. They're not too far away from playing that Rams game where they probably got, assuming everything goes according to plan, right? Which it never does, but let's just say it does. They probably got a good ass kicking just 2 weeks prior to this. Then the Browns are coming to town, and the Browns are going to probably come in with a pretty physical attack, especially assuming Deshaun Watson is still suspended. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt should be kind of manning the attack here and being a real force to reckon with come week 4. Everybody should still be healthy, all that kind of good stuff, right? But if that was not enough, if we look at the Browns' schedule, the same thing, obviously week 4 for them. They play the Panthers, then the Jets at home, then the Steelers at home, before traveling to Atlanta. So they don't have any rest issues here. They're not traveling across the country. They're not having to move anything until the week of their actual game against Atlanta. But when they play the Steelers, this is actually a mini bye. This Steelers game is a Thursday night game. So while the Falcons are going to have rest issues because of their travel, they're also going to be playing on a Sunday night, whereas the Browns will be playing that prior Thursday, having time to evaluate, watch the Falcons game that happens that following Sunday before traveling to Atlanta. So they'll have more than ample time to get their schedules right, to do their flying, do their traveling, get their practices in, kind of create the scheme that they're going to use for the Falcons, all that kind of stuff. Kevin Stefanski's not a rookie anymore. I think he knows what he's doing here, and he should be able to take advantage of this spot. Now, all of this is not self-evident. It's not something that your general public is going to look at and say, week 4, that's the one I really want to step on right now. So, I don't think you're going to have a huge line movement right this second on this game. You can probably wait a little bit, and honestly, maybe even be able to wait until we get into the season. But, again, assuming that things go as we are expecting them, the Falcons are probably going to be bigger and bigger underdogs as they lose more and more games. So that first week, let's say that they win against the Saints somehow. If they lose in week 2, especially if they lose in week 3 against the Rams and the Seahawks, that line could be bigger. Now, again, all of that being said, they do play the Saints and the Seahawks, 2 teams I don't have a whole lot of high hopes for. So it's very possible that they go into this Browns game with the 2-1 record. And if that's the case, again, the line may not be a huge difference. As of right now, the line currently sits at Browns minus 2.5. So if you can, and if you have the funds to just spend and you're not in a hurry to get them back right now, you may want to lay something down, even if it's just a few pennies, on that week 4 game to make sure that you get that good line. Because my assumption here is that you're going to probably have to get Browns minus 3.5 or more by the time we actually get to this. Whereas right now you can get that key number at the minus 2.5. So again, I understand it's early. I understand everyone's a little strapped for cash right now, with the world being what it is. But if you can, that is something I'm looking at. All right. So enough of that. Enough of those picks. If that's what you're here for, those are really the two that you're going to get from me today. We'll look in some others next time, as we always do. But let me get on my soapbox here. Let's talk about some coaching stuff. Why do I always preach coaching? And I think coaching in most sports gets talked about, at least somewhat, if nothing else, at least by like your TV personalities and things like that. But in the NFL, I truly believe that coaching matters more than any other sport. And the reason that I believe this is because it is one of, if not the only sport where you can actually change the players on the field. And I don't mean, like just subbing people out. Let's take, for example, the NBA, right? Championships going on right now. Doesn't matter what the coach does. Doesn't matter what he thinks, he wants to move in and out of the court or whatever. He still has to have his point guard, his shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center. Doesn't matter. He's got one of each all the time. It is what it is. And he can sub the guys in and out for those positions, but they have to be out there. Same thing with baseball. Same thing with most other sports. In football, that's not the case. The coach is going to dictate to the team who is out there, what personnel is out there, and how many of what player type is out there. That's why we have, your 4-3 defense, your 3-4 defense, your nickel, your dime, all the other packages that you have in the NFL. And I think that's one thing that a lot of your just general fans don't understand. And that's fine. They don't have to. They're just there to watch Super Bowl party and kind of ruin it for you and talk in your face and not give a shit about your feelings that I care about. But that being aside, this is why coaching is important. Your coach is going to create the style and the gameplay for the team. The team is going to only do what the coach says and what he has them prepared for. If he fails in game planning, if he fails in scheming, the team is going to fail. And that is why it does not really, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's not as big of an advantage in the NFL to have a team of star players if you don't have a good coach. In the NBA, you can have 5 all-star players, and most likely you're going to win a championship or at least get into the playoffs. In the NFL, we've seen team after team after team, year after year after year, put together great rosters on paper and not do jack shit with it. And that's just because of coaching. So that all goes into me saying there have been a lot of coaching changes this year. And when I mean a lot, I'm not just saying like hypothetically or just like, oh, well, there's more than, 1 or 2. There's a lot more than there have been in prior years. I want to say I went back 3 to 4 years, and most years you have like 2 to 3 head coaching changes. And then of those, let's say 3, maybe like 1 or 2 of them is like a full makeover, meaning that you get a new offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and head coach. And this year, we have just a whole list of them that we're going to go through. And I'm going to kind of touch on each of the coaches as well as their backgrounds and what I think it means for those teams. So first, let me just go over the changes, and then we'll dive into each individual one. So I'm going to try to kind of focus on the ones that had just the head coaching changes. If they only change like offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, that can or maybe won't have a big influence on the team. It should just kind of make a little change as far as the head coaching being able to still kind of dictate the style. Those coordinators are going to still have to fall in line with whatever the head coach asks for. So let's talk about your head coaching changes first. And we have the Bears. The Bears did have a full makeover. You have Eberflus that came in, and he actually is coming in from Indy. as their defensive coordinator, and then he also brings the Indy defensive backs coach as his defensive coordinator. So they are going to bring that kind of Colts mentality to the Bears. Then they hire Luke Gatesy, the quarterback coach from Green Bay, as their offensive coordinator. You have Nathaniel Hackett, who comes in for the Broncos, and he has also a full makeover. So he's bringing his Green Bay coach with him as well, from the tight end coach that is, and he's going to make him his offensive coordinator. And then he has the Rams defensive backs coach from last year, and I don't know how to pronounce that, is Evero as his defensive coordinator. So again, another full makeover there. The Texans moved Lovie Smith, so he was already with the Texans as a defensive coordinator, but they moved him over to head coach for this year, and he's still going to be effectively the defensive coordinator for the Texans. And that's one thing that I think is a really big red flag that a lot of people miss, and they kind of just glaze over it. The Texans are not expected to do anything great, so not a whole lot of talk about them anyways, but there's a few other teams where we're going to see that here. Pep Hamilton is going to be their offensive coordinator. Again, he was already with Houston. He was their pass coordinator. Now he's just their offensive coordinator. So Houston makes some moves, still guys that were already in the room. I don't think that's really any much of a change, and I'm really not going to talk about them too much because it's not really a huge change for these guys. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to be anything better. If anything, it may be worse. We'll see if we talk about it if we have time. The Jaguars do bring in Doug Peterson as their new head coach. Obviously, he was the Eagles head coach prior to this. They're also bringing Mike Caldwell as their defensive coordinator. He was the Tampa Bay linebackers coach. Have Press Taylor as the offensive coordinator, coming from Indy as the offensive assistant. Then we also have Josh McDaniels coming to the Raiders as their head coach, and he is going to have Mick Lombardi as his offensive coordinator and Patrick Graham as his defensive coordinator. Lombardi coming from New England and Patrick Graham coming from New York. Then we have Mike McDaniel going to be coaching the Dolphins this year. He was the San Francisco 49ers offensive coordinator, and he brings Frank Smith, who was the Chargers run coordinator, as his offensive coordinator now. One of the big ones that everyone's talking about is Kevin O'Connell going to the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Kevin O'Connell was the Rams offensive coordinator last year when they won the Super Bowl, obviously. Wes Phillips was the Rams tight ends coach. He's going to be the offensive coordinator, but Kevin O'Connell is going to be calling the plays. So that's kind of a weird mix there, and that's one of those flags I was talking about. It seems like O'Connell may be trying to take on a whole lot here in his first year as head coach. Now, he does, technically have an OC, so that should help some, but we'll see how that plays out. Ed Donatel is going to be their defensive coordinator, and for whatever reason, it doesn't show him as a brand new coach, but this is his first year as a defensive coordinator for the Vikings. So next is the Saints, and they're going to have Dennis Allen as their head coach. He was previously already in the room, but as the defensive coordinator. And then they're going to have Chris Richards as one of their defensive coordinators, and Ryan Nielsen as their other defensive coordinator, which should be fun, of course. The other big one, and the one that I really like, is the Giants, and they're going to bring Brian Daboll in as their head coach. Mike Kafka as the Chiefs. He was previously the Chiefs quarterback coach. He's going to now be the offensive coordinator. Brian Daboll obviously was the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, now the head coach. You guys already know, or you should know if you listen to these videos, I love Brian Daboll. I think he's an amazing coordinator, and I think he'll be an awesome coach. They also bring in Don Martindale as a defensive coordinator. Don Martindale was the Ravens' prior defensive coordinator, and this is another one that we're going to touch on here in just a second. Lastly, though, we have the Buccaneers with Todd Bowles. Same thing, he was already in the room. He was the defensive coordinator under Bruce Arians last year. They're just moving him over to head coach, and then they bring in some new defensive coordinators. Now, this is another one, much like the Texans, where I don't think it's really an improvement for them. And I know there was some issues with Tom Brady and Arians that caused the issue there, but I will say I don't like that move. And actually, let me just go and start with this one since we're here at it already. Todd Bowles has previously been a coach. If you weren't aware, he used to coach the Jets, and sometimes they'll bring up that he had a good season with the Jets. It was with 10-6 in 2015. I believe that was the year that they had a run in the AFC. I think that was one of their AFC champions. Maybe not, but either way, they did have a 10-6 schedule. However, that 10-6 year was really the anomaly under Bowles, and a lot of that was based upon the players, and the players just outplaying the coach. That defensive team, if you don't remember, or at least the defensive side of the ball, still had Darrelle Revis, Cromartie, Sheldon Richardson, Muhammad Wilkerson, Demario Davis. I mean, you had like all-stars all up and down the defense, and I think Brandon Marshall was still on the offense. So, really, really good team that went 10-6 that year. After 2015, so the next year he went 5-11, and the next year after that he went 5-11, and then he finished 4-12. So again, really just one solid year with the Jets, and if you ask me, it's, again, like I said, more the players just kind of outplaying the coach. I don't think he's really going to amount to too much here with the Buccaneers. I think if the Buccaneers are going to stay on top and be as good as they can be, it's going to be because of Tom Brady. So it may be very possible that Bowles kind of ends up in that situation again with the players just being so good he can't mess up, especially when Tom Brady is, or can be essentially your field coach, right? So maybe he is good enough to kind of compensate for that. But that being said, it's not a position I would want my team in. I don't want my players having to win in spite of my coach. So that's where we're going to start. Next, let's talk about Denver. And Denver, I'm going to start there because Nathaniel Hackett is not somebody that has really been talked about a whole lot. He was the Green Bay OC, like we said earlier, and he's going to bring a lot of that Green Bay offense with him with the tight end coach. So he's clearly kind of trying to replicate what was in Green Bay, or at least kind of keep some of those pieces to the scheme in place and maybe kind of recreate some of that. That being said, though, there's really not a whole lot there as far as any track record of success other than what Green Bay did with him. But keep in mind, same thing. He was playing with Aaron Rodgers. Now he's going to play with Russell Wilson. So still a good coach. Still good players, still other good players as far as receivers, running backs. They're loaded on offense. It's going to be how he uses these guys. I do believe they'll be able to kind of work some sort of scheme out where they're getting their running backs involved, something like what we saw in Green Bay, where the passing game is kind of like an extension of the run game. Obviously, Green Bay had Devontae Adams. He was, amazing, and I think you will see some of those splash plays, but a lot of these just kind of like slow and steady drives and being able to just move the ball when they need to and getting things done like that, not necessarily needing to go out there and put up, 45, 50 points to win, just kind of playing within their game, and that's good. I think that the Broncos will do fine with that, and it's going to come down to matchup for them as far as, whether we like them or not when it comes to gambling or betting or fantasy or whatever it may be. That being said, though, Hackett has spent most of his time on offense, really almost all of his time within the NFL has been on offense. He was an offensive quality control person for the the Buccaneers and the Bills. Then he was the OC for Syracuse when he went back to college, the Bills, Jacksonville, and Green Bay. So he was okay there. Now, in Jacksonville, when he was the offensive coordinator, they did have one really solid season, went 10-6 in 2017, and they did have an average point per game of 26 that same year. So one solid year. Other 2 years were not really that great. His average points per game as an offensive coordinator were 20 and 15 in the other 2 years he was there. So again, not really a huge track record of success, but he does have something, and we do know he's going to be an offensive-minded coach, which is always a positive. So that's going to be pretty much it for Hackett. So the next guy I want to talk about is really the main guy I want to talk about, which is Brian Daboll going to the Giants, right? And I'm sorry I can't hold off any longer on this. I just really want to talk about the guy. So obviously he's coming from the high-powered offense with the Bills. More importantly, the high-powered offense that was his design, or at least I am attributing that to his design. Matt Kafka, again, the OC from Kansas. So he is another piece of the personnel who was involved with a high-powered offense. So maybe he was not the designer of the Chiefs offense, but he's at least familiar with that style of play. That style of, we want to put up a lot of points. And you're basically taking two of the highest powered offenses that we've seen in the last 2, 3, 4 years and kind of putting two of those guys together, at least, on this team now. So I do believe you're going to see a lot of changes with New York and a lot of emphasis on scoring, if not more into passing. Now, that being said, obviously you do still have to kind of keep an eye on the personnel, because if it's not there, it's just not there. Now, that is one thing we have not seen from Brian Daboll. Will he change and adapt to his personnel? I believe that he will. I think we've seen that with the Bills previously, as far as just being able to kind of utilize Josh Allen to the fullest. But we haven't seen him do it as a head coach yet. So we'll see when he gets there. But I do believe we'll have a lot of success with him. Also, though, Don Martindale, their defensive coordinator, like I said, he did come from Baltimore. Last year, they didn't really have a good finish. They didn't have a good year. If you remember, though, the Ravens defense was just in shambles almost from the start. I mean, the Ravens team, right? Right now, a lot of people are talking about J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards still because of their injuries, and hopefully they'll be back this year. But their defense was just, missing almost everybody. If you go back and look at some of the guys they're missing, I want to say by like midway of the season, all of or most of the secondary was on the injured reserve list, or at least out, missing time. And that was just for bunches of weeks at a time. I think it really put a damper on that defense. Prior to that, though, he was the defensive coordinator in 2020, 2019, and 2018 for those same Ravens. And his defensive DVOA finish was 9th, 5th, and 4th, respectively. So he never finished worse than 9th place as far as defensive DVOA while he was a defensive coordinator with the Ravens in those 3 years. And then the time last year when he did finish outside the top 10, I strongly believe that was just a personnel issue. He just had injury, and that'll happen. So, in New York, and I'm saying this as a Cowboys fan, the Giants have got an amazing coaching staff on their hands. Now, will their GM go along with what they ask for? Will they put the right pieces there? Who knows? But either way, I think the Giants are being slept on right now. If nothing else, at least for fantasy. Because I do believe you're going to see guys like Kenny Golladay, Saquon Barkley, and some other pieces in that offense, at least one other piece, kind of come to life with these amazing schemes. And then the defense should be able to kind of hold their own. So if they can stay in games and not get blown out, we should see a better season for Saquon Barkley, again, assuming he stays healthy as well. So that's enough of me gushing on Brian Daboll and the Giants team, but I really do believe that's something you need to be looking out for and just kind of keeping in mind as you move forward, whether it's betting or fantasy or whatever else it may be. You know what, on that note, before I move to the next coach, I just want to make a real quick comment. Right now is a big time for fantasy, and I say that because if you're looking for podcasts, if you're looking on YouTube, whatever, you're not really seeing a lot of gambling content right now, and that makes sense. The lines are out, but there's not any big rush. The games are not tomorrow or anything like that, so there's not a whole lot of gambling content out there. There is some, but for the most part, if you're looking at football, you're going to probably see fantasy stuff. When you hear guys talk about players, a perfect example is J.K. Dobbins, right? You're going to hear a lot of stuff from last year come up. So, like in the case of J.K. Dobbins, you're going to hear his injury history, how the Ravens did, how they finished, what he could have maybe been, what they think he's going to do next year, what he's going to get forecasted for, how many touches he's going to get, how many touchdowns they think he'll get, how many scores that the Ravens are going to get, and all that stuff. And that's fine. That's how you project, right? But they do not talk about the coaching. In the Ravens example, obviously they still have Harbaugh, so not a big change there. But if you look at other teams around the league, any of the teams that we're talking about today, they're not going to talk about that. So when they talk about Saquon Barkley, when they talk about how he's been injury prone, or how he hasn't been scoring touchdowns, or the Giants offense just isn't the same, and what can you really expect from the Giants, blah 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 blah, they're going to talk about what happened last year as if it's just going to continue happening. And to this day, I have not heard any fantasy analyst bring up the point that not only is there a new head coach, there is an entire new staff with what should be an entire new philosophy for that team, and that whether those players are the same or not from last year, they're going to be used entirely different, and the style of play is going to be entirely different. And I do believe that's how you're going to find niches in the fantasy community. You're going to find just kind of market values that fall to you, because nobody else is looking at this coaching information. Nobody else is looking at the style that's going to be played for these new teams, and kind of where the upper management is taking the team. They're just looking at what happened last year and what they think this player is going to do, or what carries that they're going to get. So if you do play fantasy, and you probably do if you're this involved in football, just kind of keep that in mind. And guys, I'm sorry, you probably hear my voice going in and out. Like I said, I was traveling. I am recovering from something. God knows what bug I got, man. Florida, you guys got some really shitty bugs out there. But let's go ahead and move on. Let's go to New Orleans with Dennis Allen. So like I said, Dennis Allen actually comes over from the defensive coordinator spot already with the Saints to the head coach of the Saints. And really, he's been pretty defensive-minded his entire NFL career, which, as you know, or you probably know by now, not really a good sign as far as I'm concerned. A lot of the defensive-minded head coaches, it would not be a problem if they were to only focus on the defense and kind of let the offense do what it does. But most of these guys don't. Most of these guys want to be super conservative and not let the offense make a mistake, because they want to just focus on their defense and play, mistake-free football. That's not how you win in the NFL, and that's why a lot of these guys just don't ever get to, the mountaintop. That's why they're not the Rams or the Chiefs or the Buccaneers or anything like that. So that's not really a great sign as far as I'm concerned. Aside from that, he previously did coach the Raiders from 2012 to 2014. His finishes were much like Todd Bowles. He went 4-12, 4-12, and then 3-13. So again, not really a huge track record of success there. Another team where we kind of see that same issue play out as far as being more like defensive minded is going to be with the Chicago Bears, and that's going to be Matt. Is it Eberflus or I don't know, however the hell you say that. Anyways, Matt, if you're listening, you're not listening, so it don't matter. Anyways, so he joins as a head coach. Now he's again another coach that's really only been on the defensive side of the ball as a linebackers coach or defensive coordinator. And then, like we said earlier, he was most recently the defensive coordinator for the Colts. So, same thing. Not a bad defensive coach. I think that the Colts defense was kind of underrated last year. I think they did fine. I think he's had a decent defense pretty much his whole career. The problem, again, goes to what is his style of play going to be like, especially with a team like the Bears with a young quarterback in Justin Fields and not a whole lot of weapons. Is this going to be a very run-heavy, defensive-minded team, which I fully expect it will be, and that's a problem, because you're going to put Justin Fields in a lot of bad spots, and you're going to make him throw into a lot of bad coverages and put him into a lot of third and long distances, and that's really not the best way to use him and to get the most out of him. Now, the Bears do have Luke Getsy, the offensive coordinator. He was a quarterback coach for the Packers. Now, he may kind of put a spark in the offense. The problem again goes to he's going to have to kind of own up to Eberflus. So if Matt says they want a slow-paced offense and they want to have a certain style of play, there's really not too much that the offensive coordinator is going to be able to do about that. So that's kind of where they are. And another reason I don't think the Bears are going to have a very successful year, and they're probably not going to have a great franchise until they find a head coach that can work with Justin Fields instead of trying to work against him or around him. The next one we'll talk about here is Jacksonville with Doug Peterson. Obviously, he won the Super Bowl with the Eagles, so Super Bowl caliber coach, and that team was not necessarily like overwhelming on offense. So I think it is definitely a step up. And from last year, there's really only one way to go for the Jaguars as far as coaching was concerned. Urban Meyer was just a total mess. That guy should never have been in the NFL. That being said, though, I do think Doug Peterson is going to get the most out of Trevor Lawrence, or at least kind of get him on the right path and help him develop. And that should also be a good thing for the entire offense, especially somebody like ETN, who should be able to get some passes out of the backfield, kind of build that rapport with Trevor Lawrence, and just kind of get this offense clicking. And I think you're going to see a lot of people surprised by the Jaguars with a competent coach and a quarterback who can be really, really good if he's used the right way and kind of, taken off the leash. I think they're going to surprise some people. I'm not saying they're going to be great. I'm not saying they're going to be even like a 8-9 team. I just think that they're probably a little bit better than you're expecting them to be. And for as many people as just kind of shitting on them and thinking that they're going to go like 1-16, and people who don't want to touch their players for fantasy or whatever, I think you might want to look into that. And there's probably going to be some spots throughout the year where we can look to be on the Jaguars and kind of be with them when it comes to surprising the league and everybody else for that matter. Alright, well, let's move on to the Raiders with Josh McDaniels. So he's an interesting one, mainly because he comes from New England, and under Bill Belichick, I'm sure he learned something along the way. But we have seen a lot of Bill Belichick's, kind of coaching tree not do entirely, great. That being said, most of them have not been like total burnouts either. So it's kind of a mixed bag with him. But McDaniels has kind of earned his way into this job. And I do think he's one of the coaches that, if nothing else, can adapt. So he was able to adapt from Tom Brady to, I guess, Cam Newton for a second there. And then kind of going into Mac Jones. So he should be able to find a scheme or find something that will work for this Raiders offense. Especially having weapons like a Devontae Adams and a Darren Waller and a Josh Jacobs, and just guys kind of all over that you can use in so many different ways, and even like a Hunter Renfrow. So you have a little bit of everything. You kind of have at least one guy that fills every spot on that team. And you have your quick guy, you have your deep threat guy, you have your decent running back. You have everything that you need there to create a successful offense. So I'm very curious as to how he's going to work out. I don't hear a whole lot of talk about Josh McDaniels, and this is kind of one of those teams that falls into that trap of anytime you hear about their players, you hear more the player kind of fitting last year's scheme, which obviously was weird for the Raiders. But when you're talking about Devontae Adams, or even Darren Waller for that matter, or Hunter Renfrow, who just got a new contract, try to keep in mind that they're going to have a new coach. And so that should be a positive for them. But until we kind of see it play out, we're not sure who's going to get kind of the star treatment, if there is going to be one person or if it's going to be like a different scheme where it's kind of spread out. But just kind of keep that one in mind. And as the season goes on, we'll have to make another evaluation on Josh McDaniels. Another McDaniel is Mike McDaniel from Miami with the Dolphins. Now, this is one another what I find really interesting but kind of for the opposite reason. So Mike McDaniel, like we said, was the OC for San Francisco. Super run-heavy team. Now, again, that's from their head coach. So will Mike McDaniel be the same way? Maybe, maybe not. I tend to think that he will be, especially because they did find success there in San Francisco. I could see him trying to kind of recreate that with his new team. And the first sign that he's trying to do that is that he brought Frank Smith. And since Frank was the running coordinator with the Chargers, that signals to me that McDaniel already kind of had in his mind he wants to create a 49ers-like offense. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be all run. They can be kind of like what we saw Deebo Samuel last year, using the pass as the extension of the run, especially with guys like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, where you can give them, bubble screens or 3-4 yard routes and let them kind of do the work for you. I think that would be a great combination. So it's either going to be really, really good for the entire team, and they're going to be able to kind of move the ball effectively and take advantage of all the pieces that they have, or if they revert to just a strictly run-heavy team, I think that's going to be an issue. Obviously, just being run-heavy is kind of an issue in and of itself, but they don't really have a great standout running back right now. I believe Chase Edmonds is their starter, quote-unquote, for right now, and he's never really had like 3-down work before. They have a whole stable of guys there, but I don't think they have one great running back or this amazing offensive line that they can kind of run behind. So I'm hoping that they opt for the first option and kind of use these short routes and utilize those great receivers that they have and not just kind of rely on the run so much. All right, and then last one here I'm going to talk about before my voice gives out. Thank you guys for bearing with me through this one. Is the Minnesota Vikings, Kevin O'Connell, for me, the second best change for the offseason, kind of the runner-up for the offseason. But like I said, O'Connell does come from the Rams offense, and he's another guy who's almost worked exclusively on offense. He was a quarterback coach, offensive coordinator, obviously, passing game coordinator, and then to top it off, he did get to work with Kirk Cousins previously, only for a year. In 2017, they were both at Washington. So not only does he have at least some familiarity with the quarterback, but we're looking at a coach here who should come in with an emphasis on the offense and trying to be high-powered offense, trying to use his amazing receivers like Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen to kind of lead the way, and then guys like Dalvin Cook to just kind of coast you home and kind of knock that last nail in when it's the end of the game, when it's time to actually run the ball. I don't know if any of you remember this, back when Jeff Daniels or Jeff something was the coach of the Rams. Then he got fired, and they brought in Sean McVay, and we saw an instant turnaround of that team. I think we're looking at a very similar deal here with the Vikings. Mike Zimmer, very similar run-heavy coach. Let's not make any mistakes kind of coach. Getting replaced by Kevin O'Connell should be a huge turnaround for this team almost immediately. And I think you're going to see that offense be very efficient. And it's another team that I want to get on my fantasy teams if you are playing fantasy. And I think even guys like Dalvin Cook, while I think you may see his carries go down, I think you're going to see his efficiency go way, way up. That all being said, I think the team or his players, his pieces are already in place for him. Surprisingly enough, I think Zimmer had the right people there. He just needed to put a different philosophy in place. So when Kevin O'Connell comes in, the only question mark I have for him is his offensive coordinator. Now, Wes Phillips, again, he was the Rams tight end coach, so I definitely think that they're going to try and use that Rams philosophy and kind of build their own Rams-like offense. Now, how well that works, we'll see. I think only Sean McVay can truly put his stamp on that. But Kevin O'Connell could definitely make a very successful variation of it. But the fact that Kevin O'Connell insists on being the play caller, even though he has an offensive coordinator, could go one of two ways. If he kind of lets his OC do most of the work and he's just strictly like the final yes-no guy, I could see that working because he wants to make sure, like, hey, we're being aggressive enough at all the times and all that stuff. If he's going to be more involved in that and he's going to kind of keep his hand in that offensive cookie jar but try to do everything else at the same time, I think you're going to see that be an issue. So we'll see how he plays out. But those are all the changes for right now, guys. I'm glad that you at least heard about them, heard me try to talk about them. Like I said, just kind of keep this in the back of your mind moving forward as we go through this offseason and get closer to actual football again. So thank you again for bearing with me through this one. I hope you guys are having a great summer and are ready to start making some bets here shortly. And have a great day.